In the peaceful town of Meadowbrook, Sheriff Jason Carter's split-second decision to confront a black woman, Alicia, watching over two white children sets off a storm of accusations and deep division. What starts as suspicion quickly spirals into a town-wide controversy, forcing Jason to face the harsh reality of his actions. As tensions rise, both he and Alicia are pushed into a journey of forgiveness, redemption, and change. Can Jason make amends, or is the damage to the community and himself too great to repair? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking stories that inspire and challenge us. Let's dive in. Sheriff Jason Carter leaned back in his patrol car, watching the small, picturesque town of Meadowbrook bathed in the soft morning light. The park across the street buzzed with activity, children playing on the swings, joggers making their morning laps, and old friends catching up on park benches. It was a scene of peace, of safety, a testament to what Jason had spent nearly 20 years maintaining. At 45, with his broad shoulders and a face worn from years in the sun, Jason still felt every inch the protector of this close-knit community. He had grown up here, known every face, every street corner. Meadowbrook was home, and he'd sworn to keep it that way, safe from any threat, no matter how subtle or small. Jason's mentor, the retired Sheriff Ray Daniels, used to tell him, "Trust your gut, kid. Your gut will always know when something's off." It was advice Jason had carried with him through his entire career, and it hadn't steered him wrong. Over the years, he had faced burglars, vandals, and a few domestic disturbances, but nothing too drastic. Still, every day, he followed Ray's mantra, always keeping an eye out for the small things that didn't sit right. This morning, as Jason sipped his coffee and prepared for another routine patrol, something out of the corner of his eye caught his attention. A woman, Alicia Thomas, walked hand in hand with two small children through the park. The children, both white, looked to be about 5 and 7 years old, skipping happily as Alicia, a black woman, gently guided them toward the playground. Jason's brow furrowed slightly. He didn't recognize the woman, though that wasn't uncommon. People moved in and out of the town all the time. But something felt off. His gut, that old trusted compass, gave him a nudge. The contrast between Alicia and the children sparked a thought. Could she be their nanny? Jason knew that Meadowbrook was a predominantly white town, and seeing a black woman with two white children stirred an unease in him, one he couldn't shake. He kept his eyes on her as she walked, her calm and caring demeanor a stark contrast to the suspicion that began to build in Jason's mind. His gut told him to follow, and so he did. Jason followed Alicia through the park, keeping a distance. As the children reached the playground and began climbing the jungle gym, Alicia stood nearby, watching them closely. She smiled as the children giggled and called out for her attention, clearly in charge of their care. Yet, despite the normalcy of the scene, Jason couldn't shake the unease that had settled into his chest. His thoughts raced. He hadn't seen her before. He didn't know those kids. What if they weren't safe? What if she wasn't who she said she was? The rational part of Jason's mind fought to counter his suspicions. But the other part, the part that had seen enough on the news about kidnappings and child endangerment, fueled his worry. He considered that Alicia might just be their nanny. And yet, what if she wasn't? Jason picked up his radio, his voice calm but firm. "This is Carter. I'm gonna need backup at Meadowbrook Park. There's a situation I'm checking out." His backup, Officer Kyle Sanders, responded quickly, though a little perplexed. "Roger that, Sheriff. Everything all right." "Just a precaution," Jason said, his eyes never leaving Alicia. Jason's mind wandered back to Ray's teachings. "Don't ignore your gut," Ray would always say. But was his gut wrong this time? Was he letting his own biases creep into his judgment? Jason quickly pushed the doubt aside. His job was to protect. If there was even a small chance something was wrong, he needed to act. He stepped out of his patrol car and started walking toward the playground, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. The kids were playing, laughing, completely oblivious to his approach. Alicia, standing by the swings, seemed relaxed, like any caretaker would be. But Jason's suspicions gnawed at him. "Morning, Mom," Jason said, his tone firm but polite as he approached. Alicia turned, her expression calm, though her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "Good morning, officer," she said. Her voice was soft, kind. Jason's eyes darted to the children and back to Alicia. "Can I ask you what you're doing with these kids?" His tone was direct, maybe too direct, but he didn't care. He needed answers. Alicia looked taken aback, but she remained composed. "I'm their nanny," she said, offering a small, polite smile. "I take care of them while their parents are at work." Jason's suspicion only deepened. "How long have you been their nanny?" he asked, his gaze narrowing slightly. 3 years, Alicia answered, her voice calm but tinged with discomfort. "I work for the Bennett family. They live over on Maple Avenue." The mention of a familiar street did little to ease Jason's doubts. He had been the sheriff of Meadowbrook long enough to know most families in the area, but he didn't recognize Alicia or the children for that matter. The small town was tight-knit, and Jason prided himself on being in the know. 3 years, huh?" Jason said, crossing his arms. "I don't think I've ever seen you around here." Alicia blinked, her smile fading slightly. "I've been here nearly every day, officer. Maybe we've just missed each other." Jason's jaw tightened. His gut kept telling him something was off, and now his pride wouldn't let him back down. He needed more information. "Do you have some identification on you?" "Maybe the parents' contact info," Jason asked, his tone hardening slightly. Alicia's eyes flickered with concern. "I can call Mrs. Bennett if that helps," she said, reaching into her bag for her phone. But Jason's patience was wearing thin. "Step away from the children," he ordered, more forcefully than he had intended. Alicia's eyes widened in alarm. "Officer, please, there's no need for that. I'm just here with the kids." "There's no trouble." Jason's hand hovered near his holster. His gut screamed at him to take control of the situation. The children, sensing the tension, stopped playing and looked over at the 2 adults. The youngest boy, Eli, began to whimper, clutching his toy tighter. "I said step away," Jason repeated, his voice firm. Alicia took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The kids watched her with wide, fearful eyes, and she could feel the weight of their gaze. She didn't want to scare them, but Jason's aggressive stance left her little choice. "Officer, I'm not doing anything wrong," Alicia said, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm just here with the kids. You can call their parents." "Please, you're frightening them." Jason's mind raced. He wanted to believe her, but his instincts, his gut kept telling him otherwise. He glanced at the children, their faces now twisted with confusion and fear. Maybe he was overreacting. But what if he wasn't? Just as he was about to respond, the sound of a car pulling up behind him broke the tension. Jason turned to see Sarah Bennett, the children's mother, rushing toward them. Her face was a mixture of panic and anger. "Officer, what's going on here?" Sarah demanded, her voice sharp. "What are you doing?" Jason's grip on his belt loosened slightly as he turned to face Sarah. "Mom, I was just ensuring the safety of these children," he said, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "I didn't recognize this woman, and—" "She's our nanny," Sarah interrupted, her eyes blazing with fury. "Alicia has been with us for years. How dare you treat her like this?" Jason's heart sank. He glanced at Alicia, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression now one of hurt and disbelief. The children ran to their mother, tears streaming down their faces. They clung to her legs, sobbing, "Mommy, make him stop." Jason felt the world closing in around him. He had made a mistake, a big one. The weight of it settled heavily on his chest as he watched Sarah comfort her children and pull Alicia into a protective embrace. By now, a small crowd had gathered, and some of them had their phones out, recording the scene. Jason's skin prickled as he realized how this would look, how it already looked. He had acted on an assumption, and it was spiraling out of control. The unease he had felt earlier twisted into something darker: regret, shame. "Mom, I'm sorry," Jason stammered, but his apology fell flat. Sarah shot him a glare so fierce that it silenced any further words. "You should be," Sarah said coldly. "You scared my children, harassed our nanny, and you think a simple apology will fix this." Jason opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His mind raced as the crowd murmured around him, their faces filled with judgment and disgust. Sarah Bennett, still holding the trembling children, straightened up and turned to Alicia. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softening as she addressed the woman who had cared for her children like they were her own. Alicia nodded slowly, though her hands were shaking. "I'm fine, but this is too much." Sarah's face darkened as she turned back to Jason, her fury bubbling to the surface. "You've overstepped, Sheriff. You saw a black woman with white children and jumped to the worst conclusion. This isn't just a mistake, it's racial profiling, plain and simple." Jason's heart raced as the word racial profiling rang in his ears. Was that what he had done? Was his gut instinct just a product of his own biases? The thought chilled him, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that he had been doing his job protecting the town, protecting these children. "I didn't mean," Jason started, but Sarah cut him off. You didn't mean to terrify my children, to make Alicia feel like a criminal for simply doing her job. You didn't mean to bring your prejudices into this." Well, guess what? You did. The people around them were still recording, their phones capturing every second of the confrontation. Jason knew this was bad, really bad. It wasn't just his word against theirs anymore. This would be on the news. It would be online for everyone to see. And what would they see? A sheriff acting out of line, mistreating a woman of color for no good reason. Jason took a step back, his mind racing. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had only been following his instincts, that he had only been trying to protect the children. But no one was listening. No one wanted to hear his side. Sarah, her voice trembling with anger, turned to the crowd. "I want everyone to know that Alicia is a part of our family. She has taken care of my children for years, and we trust her completely. What happened here today was an injustice, and it won't be swept under the rug." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and Jason felt the walls closing in. He had lost control of the situation, and now all he could do was watch as it spiraled out of his hands. As the confrontation continued to unfold, Jason's world began to crumble. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a boulder, suffocating any sense of control he had once felt. His gut, the compass that had guided him for so long, had led him astray. Sarah's words echoed in his mind: racial profiling. It was a term he had heard before, a term he had always associated with bigger cities, with incidents on the news. Never Meadowbrook, never him. But now, here he was, standing in the middle of a public park, accused of exactly that. The reality of his actions hit him like a tidal wave, sweeping away any justifications or excuses he had clung to. He looked at Alicia, standing quietly beside Sarah, her face a mask of hurt and disappointment. He had wronged her, there was no denying it. And now, with the crowd watching, recording, judging, Jason realized that there was no undoing what had been done. For Alicia, the moment felt surreal. She had always known that being a black woman in a predominantly white town came with challenges, but she had never expected something like this. She had trusted the people in Meadowbrook, believed that she was part of this community, but now she wasn't so sure. The children, still clinging to Sarah, looked at her with tear-streaked faces, their innocence shattered by the ugliness of what had just happened. Alicia's heart broke for them. They were too young to understand the complexities of race, of prejudice, of the fears that sometimes lurked behind a badge. As she stood there, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface of this town for years. Unspoken, but ever present. And now, because of one man's misguided instincts, it had come to light in the most public and painful way possible. The crowd, still recording, began to disperse as the tension in the air grew unbearable. Some people whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others looked at Jason with thinly veiled anger, their expressions saying what their words did not. How could you? Jason, feeling the weight of their judgment, turned away, unable to meet their eyes. He had always prided himself on being a good man, a fair man. But now he wasn't so sure. What had happened today had exposed something inside him that he hadn't even known was there, a bias, a prejudice, a flaw. As he walked back to his patrol car, his steps heavy with regret. He knew that nothing would ever be the same again. His badge, once a symbol of pride and authority, now felt like a burden. And the trust he had built with the people of Meadowbrook, that was shattered, perhaps beyond repair. Jason climbed into his car, staring at the steering wheel in silence. The park, once a place of peace and safety, now felt like a battleground one that he had created. He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't take back the fear he had caused, the damage he had inflicted. All he could do now was face the consequences of his actions, whatever they might be. As he started the engine and drove away, the weight of his mistakes pressed down on him like a leaden cloud. And Jason knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful reckoning. Jason had barely made it home when his phone began buzzing relentlessly. He sat in his living room, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The TV flickered in the corner, the evening news just starting, but he couldn't focus on anything except the knot of dread tightening in his stomach. His mind was still replaying the moment in the park, the children's cries, Sarah's fury, the shocked faces of the crowd. The first message came in from his daughter, Emily. "Dad, what happened? People are sharing videos. Everyone's talking about you." Jason froze. He hadn't fully realized the scope of what had occurred until now. His hands shook as he opened his social media app. The first thing he saw was his own face in a video, standing over Alicia with his hand hovering near his holster, the children crying in the background. The headline read, "Sheriff Harasses Innocent Black Woman Racial Profiling in Meadowbrook." His heart sank. The video had already garnered thousands of views. Comments flooded in beneath the post, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Words like racist and abuse of power jumped out at him. Strangers called for his immediate firing, while others defended his actions, saying he had been just doing his job. But no matter the comment, one thing was clear: his reputation was in ruins. Jason's wife, Samantha, walked into the living room, her face pale. She had clearly seen the video too. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. "Jason," she said softly, "what happened?" Jason rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of the storm that had overtaken his life in a matter of hours. "Tu thought something was wrong. I thought I was protecting those kids," he said, his voice thick with confusion. "I was just doing my job." Samantha shook her head. "It doesn't look like that, Jason. It looks like you overreacted. People are furious." "I know," Jason muttered. He slumped back into the couch, unable to meet her eyes. "What are we going to do?" Samantha asked, her voice cracking. "Emily's friends are asking questions. People are starting to talk. They're saying you're—" "I know what they're saying," Jason snapped, the frustration boiling over. He immediately regretted the outburst, seeing the hurt in Samantha's eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." The room fell into an oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of the TV. Jason could feel his entire world crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, on social media, the video continued to spread like wildfire. Local news outlets picked it up, airing clips and headlines questioning Jason's conduct. National attention followed shortly after, with major media platforms running stories about racial profiling in small-town America. Jason's inbox was flooded with messages, some from old friends offering their cautious support, but most from people he had never met, accusing him of being a bigot. The barrage of hate filled him with a sickening dread. He had thought he was doing the right thing, but now it seemed as though his entire career, his identity as a protector of the town, had been built on a flawed foundation. By the time midnight rolled around, Jason was too exhausted to read anymore. He turned off his phone, but the storm continued to rage outside his door. 2 days later, Jason found himself sitting in the mayor's office. Mayor Garrett Wilson sat across from him, his expression unreadable. The walls of the office, once familiar and comfortable, now felt suffocating. Jason had spent years working closely with the mayor, discussing town events and law enforcement issues. But today, the air between them was heavy with unspoken tension. "Sheriff Carter," Mayor Wilson began, his voice firm but calm, "I don't need to tell you why you're here." Jason swallowed hard, nodding. His heart raced as the mayor leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "We've got a real problem on our hands," the mayor continued. "That video of the incident at the park gets everywhere. People are angry. There are protests forming, and the town is in an uproar. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" "I do, sir," Jason replied, his voice low. "But I was trying to protect those kids. I thought—" "You thought wrong," the mayor interrupted, his eyes flashing with frustration. "You made a snap judgment based on race. Whether or not you meant to, that's how it looks. And perception matters." Jason felt a flush of shame rise in his chest. "I didn't mean for it to go this way." "That's not good enough," the mayor said sharply. "Your job isn't just to follow your gut, it's to protect the community without prejudice. And right now, the community has lost faith in you." Jason sank deeper into his chair. He had never felt so small, so helpless. "The town is divided, Jason," the mayor said, softening his tone slightly. "I've had dozens of calls, emails, even national media outlets asking for statements. People are talking about Meadowbrook as if it's the next flashpoint for racial tension in this country." Jason's heart sank. "What do you want me to do?" "For now, you're suspended from duty pending a full investigation. You'll hand over your badge and gun today," the mayor said, his voice final. "We'll conduct a review of the incident, and if we find any evidence of misconduct, you'll be terminated." "Understood." Jason nodded, his stomach churning. This was worse than he had imagined. He had thought maybe he'd get a slap on the wrist warning, maybe a temporary leave of absence. But suspension, an investigation. The prospect of losing everything. "Yes, sir," Jason said, his voice hollow. He stood up to leave, feeling the weight of the mayor's disappointment pressing down on him. "And Jason," the mayor added as Jason reached the door, "this is serious. If I were you, I'd think long and hard about what happened. Reflect on why you did what you did. Because if you can't answer that question, you don't belong in that uniform anymore." Alicia sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of tea. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, but Alicia felt anything but warm. She was cold inside, shaken to her core. It had been 3 days since the incident at the park, and the fear and humiliation of that day still clung to her like a shadow. She couldn't shake the image of Sheriff Carter towering over her, his hand hovering near his gun, the children crying at her side. She had done nothing wrong, but in that moment she had felt powerless, like she didn't belong, like she was an outsider in a place she had called home for years. Her phone buzzed on the table, but she didn't have the energy to pick it up. Messages of support had been pouring in from friends, family, and even strangers who had seen the video. But there were also the other messages, the ones filled with hate, with threats, with the ugly, toxic racism that lurked just beneath the surface of society. "Alicia, how can you stand to live in a town like that?" one of her friends had texted the night before. "You should get out while you can." Alicia had considered it. She had considered packing up and leaving Meadowbrook, leaving the Bennetts, leaving everything behind. But how could she? She loved the children like they were her own, and the Bennetts had been nothing but supportive, standing by her side throughout this entire ordeal. Still, the fear gnawed at her. What if it happened again? What if next time she? Just then, the front door creaked open and Sarah Bennett stepped inside, carrying a basket of groceries. "Alicia, I brought some things for you," she called out, her voice gentle. Alicia managed a weak smile as Sarah entered the kitchen. Sarah set the basket down on the counter and turned to Alicia, her eyes filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, pulling out a chair and sitting beside her. Alicia sighed, staring into her tea. "I don't know. I'm still shaken. I can't stop thinking about it." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. It wasn't right, and we're going to make sure Sheriff Carter faces the consequences." Alicia nodded, grateful for Sarah's support, but still feeling the weight of the uncertainty that hung over her. "I don't know if I can stay here," she said quietly. "What if something like this happens again? What if people don't want me around anymore?" Sarah's face softened with sympathy. "Alicia, you're part of this family. You belong here. And if anyone in this town can't see that, that's their problem, not yours." Alicia blinked back tears, feeling the warmth of Sarah's words seep into the cracks of her fear. But even with that reassurance, the doubt lingered. Back at home, Jason's personal life continued to unravel. His daughter, Emily, had been avoiding him ever since the video went viral. He could feel the distance growing between them, and it terrified him more than any professional consequence. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Emily finally spoke up. She had been picking at her food, her face tight with anger, her eyes refusing to meet Jason's. "Dad," she said, her voice low but sharp, "we need to talk." Jason's heart sank. He knew this was coming, but he wasn't prepared for it. "Emily, I know things are hard right now, but—" "No, Dad," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't know. You don't know what it's like to be me right now." Jason blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Emily finally looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Everyone at school is talking about you. My friends, my teachers, even people I don't know. They're all saying you're a racist. Do you know how embarrassing that is for me? Do you even care?" Jason felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Emily, of course I care. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just trying to protect the kids, right?" Emily said bitterly. "You keep saying that, but all I see is you treating someone differently because of the color of their skin. How could you do that?" Jason's chest tightened. "It wasn't about her skin, Emily. I was just doing my job." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Dad, you weren't just doing your job. You were letting your prejudice control you. And now I have to deal with the consequences, too." Jason was at a loss for words. He had never seen his daughter so hurt, so angry. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to explain himself, but he didn't know how. He didn't know if there was anything he could say to make things right. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Emily wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. "It's not just about me, Dad. It's about what you did to Alicia. You need to figure out why you did what you did. Because until you do, I don't know if I can even look at you." With that, Emily stood up and walked out of the room, leaving Jason alone with his guilt.
The house was quiet.
Too quiet. Jason sat in the dark living room, the shadows stretching long across the floor. His mind was a storm of thoughts, memories, and regrets, all swirling together until he couldn't make sense of anything. He had always prided himself on being a good Montfair man. He had built his entire identity around his job, around being the sheriff who kept Meadowbrook safe. But now, that identity was crumbling, and Jason didn't know who he was anymore. He couldn't stop thinking about what Emily had said. "You need to figure out why you did what you did." The words echoed in his mind, gnawing at him. Why had he done it? Why had he been so quick to assume the worst about Alicia? He had told himself that he was protecting the children, that he was following his gut. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Jason stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The darkness outside felt suffocating, mirroring the confusion inside him. For years, he had trusted his instincts, believed in his ability to judge a situation. But now, those instincts had led him astray. He thought back to the moment in the park, to the look on Alicia's face when he had confronted her. She had been calm, patient, but there had been something else in her eyes, fear. Fear of him. Fear of what he represented. Jason felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had never wanted to be the kind of man who made people feel afraid. He had sworn to protect everyone in Meadowbrook, no matter who they were. But in that moment, he had failed. For the first time, Jason allowed himself to consider the possibility that he had acted out of bias, out of prejudice. It was a hard truth to face, but as he stood there in the dark, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. "I judged her," Jason whispered to himself, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "I judged her because of the color of her skin." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His pride, his need to be right, had blinded him to the truth. He had let his own prejudices control him, and in doing so, he had caused pain to Alicia, to the children, to his family. Jason sank down onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating any last shred of denial he had clung to. For the first time since the incident, Jason felt truly ashamed. He had spent years upholding the law, protecting the people of Meadowbrook. But now he saw that his role as sheriff had become more about power than justice. He had a long way to go, a lot to make up for, and he didn't know if he would ever fully repair the damage he had done. But one thing was certain: he couldn't hide from the truth anymore. Jason sat in his living room, staring at the phone in his hand. It had been 3 weeks since the incident at the park, and his suspension had only deepened his sense of isolation. The investigation was ongoing, and each passing day felt like a slow erosion of everything he had once held dear. His relationship with his daughter Emily remained strained, and the town seemed to be divided, with many refusing to meet his gaze when he ventured out for groceries or gas. But amid the chaos and shame, there was one thing he knew he had to do: apologize. Truly apologize, not just for appearances, but because he needed to face what he had done. Jason knew that nothing would ever change if he didn't take responsibility for his actions. He scrolled through his contacts, finding Sarah Bennett's number. His hand hovered over the call button. Sarah had been furious with him, and rightfully so. Reaching out now felt like an enormous risk that could backfire spectacularly. But Jason knew he had no other choice. He needed to ask her for a chance to apologize to Alicia. After several agonizing moments of hesitation, he pressed the button and put the phone to his ear. It rang 3 times before Sarah's voice came through, cautious and cold. "Sheriff Carter," she said, her tone formal. Jason cleared his throat. "Sarah, I mean Mrs. Bennett. I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to ask for a favor." There was silence on the other end. Then she replied, "What kind of favor?" "I'd like to apologize," Jason said, his voice shaking slightly. "To Alicia. I need to see her face to face. I know I've caused a lot of pain, and I need to make things right." Sarah was quiet again, and Jason could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Finally she spoke, her voice softer this time. "I don't know if Alicia will want to see you, Sheriff. She's been through a lot because of you." "I understand," Jason said quickly. "I wouldn't blame her if she didn't want to meet. But I'm asking, no, I'm begging for the chance. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on what I did, and I see now how wrong I was." There was another long pause before Sarah sighed. "I'll talk to her, but I can't promise anything." "That's all I ask," Jason replied, the weight of relief settling over him, though his nerves were far from calmed. "Thank you." After ending the call, Jason leaned back against the couch, the tension in his body refusing to dissipate. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now he was taking the first step toward making amends. 2 days later, Jason received a text message from Sarah. "Alicia has agreed to meet. Tomorrow at 4 p. Ma'am, our house. Be respectful." Jason stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Alicia had agreed to see him. He couldn't believe it, but he also felt a deep sense of anxiety. What if he said the wrong thing? What if his apology wasn't enough? The next day, as he pulled up to the Bennett's house, his nerves were frayed. He sat in his truck for a few minutes, staring at the front door. He wasn't sure he could do this. But then he remembered Emily's words, Alicia's face in the park, and the terror in the children's eyes. This wasn't about him. It was about them. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the truck and approached the house. Sarah opened the door, her expression unreadable. She gave Jason a curt nod and motioned for him to follow her inside. As he stepped into the Bennett's living room, his eyes landed on Alicia, who sat on the couch with her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but there was a tension in her posture that told Jason she was bracing herself for this encounter. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Jason said softly, standing a few feet away from her. He couldn't bring himself to sit until she gave some indication that it was okay. Alicia nodded slightly, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of insincerity. "I didn't do it for you," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I did it for myself. I need closure." Jason swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand." He hesitated for a moment, then continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Alicia, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for how I treated you that day in the park. I let my own biases, my own unfounded fears, cloud my judgment. I was wrong, so wrong.
Alicia watched him closely, her face a mask of quiet strength.
Jason could feel the weight of her silence, but he knew he had to keep going. He needed to say it all, no matter how painful. "I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on what happened," Jason said, his voice trembling. "I realize now that I acted out of prejudice. I didn't see you for who you are, I only saw what I assumed. I let fear and ignorance guide me, and because of that, I hurt you and your family." Tears welled up in Jason's eyes, but he forced himself to continue. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't blame you if you never did. But I want you to know that I'm truly, deeply sorry. And I will spend the rest of my life working to be better." Alicia's expression softened slightly, but she remained silent for a moment, processing his words. Jason could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Alicia spoke. "I appreciate your apology, Sheriff Carter, and I can see that you're sincere. But forgiveness isn't something that comes easily. What you did that day, it scared me. It made me question my safety in a place I've called home for years. It made me wonder if ill ever truly belong here." Jason's throat tightened. "I know, and I can't take back what I did. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make things right, not just for you, but for the entire community." Alicia nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, pain, anger, but also, perhaps, a glimmer of understanding. "Forgiveness is a process," she said quietly. "It's not something that happens overnight. But I'll consider it." Jason exhaled shakily, grateful for even the possibility of forgiveness. "Thank you, Alicia. That means more to me than you'll ever know." As they sat in the silence that followed, Jason realized that this was only the beginning. He had a long way to go. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was taking a step in the right direction. The tension in Meadowbrook had been building ever since the incident at the park. Protests had erupted, fueled by the viral video of Jason confronting Alicia. And the town was now a focal point for national conversations about racial profiling and policing. Local activists had organized a town hall meeting, inviting the community to come together and address the issues that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. Jason had initially planned to stay away. His suspension had made it clear that he was no longer welcome in certain circles, and he feared that his presence would only cause more harm. But after his meeting with Alicia, something inside him shifted. He realized that avoiding the town hall would only make him look like a coward. He needed to face the community, even if it meant enduring their anger. The meeting was held at the local high school gymnasium, and by the time Jason arrived, the room was already packed. He spotted familiar faces. His former colleagues, local business owners, parents of the children who had once played on the same little league team as Emily. Some people glared at him when he walked in, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Jason took a seat near the back, hoping to remain inconspicuous. But as the meeting began, it became clear that his presence had not gone unnoticed. The moderator, a well-respected teacher named Linda Harris, stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. "We're here tonight to discuss the issues that have divided our community, but more importantly, we're here to find a way forward. This town is at a crossroads, and it's up to all of us to decide what kind of place Meadowbrook will be." One by one, community members took turns speaking. An older white woman expressed her confusion and hurt, saying she had always thought of Meadowbrook as a peaceful place, free from the kinds of problems seen in bigger cities. A young black man, who had grown up in Meadowbrook, spoke about the subtle racism he had experienced his entire life, saying that while the town looked idyllic on the outside, there were deep-rooted issues that no one had ever wanted to address. Jason sat in silence, listening to each speaker, his heart heavy. Every story, every comment, only deepened his understanding of how much pain had been caused, not just by him, but by a system that had allowed these issues to go unchecked for so long. Then, toward the end of the meeting, Linda Harris called Alicia to the podium. The room fell silent as Alicia made her way to the front. She stood tall, her posture radiating strength, but Jason could see the emotion in her eyes. "I never wanted to be the center of attention," Alicia began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "I never wanted to be in this position. But what happened to me in the park was a wake-up call, not just for me, but for all of us. She paused, scanning the room, her gaze landing briefly on Jason before moving on. "I love this town," she continued. "I've been a part of this community for years. I take care of the Bennett children like they're my own. But that day, in the park, I was treated like I didn't belong. Like I was a threat. And that's a feeling that no one should ever have to experience." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident," Alicia said, her voice growing stronger. "It was the result of years, decades of unspoken biases, of assumptions, of people looking the other way when they see something that doesn't fit their idea of what's normal. We can't ignore these issues anymore. We have to face them head-on." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. Alicia's words cut through him like a knife, but he knew they were true. He had been part of the problem, and now he had to be part of the solution. "I don't hate Sheriff Carter," Alicia said, her eyes briefly meeting his from across the room. "But I do expect accountability, and I expect this town to do better. We can't move forward if we don't acknowledge the pain that's been caused." The crowd erupted into applause, and Alicia stepped down from the podium, her face calm but resolute. Jason could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting to see if he would speak. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood up and made his way to the front. The murmurs grew louder, and he could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on him. When he reached the podium, he gripped the edges, his knuckles turning white. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I know that many of you don't want to hear from me tonight," Jason began, his voice shaky but clear. "And I don't blame you. I've made terrible mistakes. I acted out of ignorance, out of fear, and I hurt people I care about. People who are part of this community. And for that, I'm truly sorry." The room was silent, and Jason could feel every pair of eyes on him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. But I do want to do better. I want to learn from this, and I want to make amends not just with Alicia, but with all of you. I'm committed to making Meadowbrook a place where everyone feels safe, where no one has to experience what Alicia went through." Jason looked out at the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know I can't undo what's been done, but I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life working to make things right." He stepped down from the podium, his hands shaking, and returned to his seat. The room remained silent for a few moments before Linda Harris thanked everyone for coming and adjourned the meeting. As people began to file out, Jason felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Alicia standing beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for speaking," she said quietly. "It was a good start." Jason nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for giving me the chance." In the weeks following the town hall meeting, Alicia found herself reflecting on her role in the community and how the events had shaped her own identity. She had always known that being a black woman in Meadowbrook came with certain unspoken challenges, but she had never been forced to confront them as directly as she had that day in the park. The days following her speech were a whirlwind of emotions. She had received countless messages of support from neighbors and friends, but there were also a few hateful notes, anonymous letters left in her mailbox, warning her to leave town. The fear that had gripped her after the incident still lingered, but Alicia was determined not to let it control her. One afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through the letters of support that had come in the mail. As she read through them, her heart swelled with gratitude. These were the people who had welcomed her into their lives, who had stood by her when she needed them most. But as she sifted through the stack, she found a small envelope with no return address. She opened it carefully, and her breath caught in her throat as she read the words scrawled across the paper, "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." Alicia felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had known there would be backlash, but this was different. This was a direct threat. That evening, Alicia met with Sarah and Mark Bennett at their house. She sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing with thoughts of the anonymous letter. She hadn't told them about it yet, but she knew she couldn't keep it from them any longer. "Alicia, you've been so strong through all of this," Sarah said, her voice filled with sympathy. "But I can tell something's bothering you." "What is it?" Alicia hesitated for a moment before pulling the letter out of her purse and handing it to Sarah. "I found this in my mailbox today," she said quietly. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the note. "Oh my God, Alicia!" Mark took the letter from Sarah, his expression darkening as he read the hateful words. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice filled with anger. "We need to report this to the police." "I don't know if that will help," Alicia said, her voice trembling. "Whoever wrote this didn't leave a name. And even if they did, I don't want to live in fear." Sarah reached over and took Alicia's hand. "You don't have to live in fear, Alicia. You're part of our family. We'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Alicia blinked back tears, grateful for the Bennetts' unwavering support. But even with their reassurance, the fear gnawed at her. She loved this town, loved the children she cared for, but she couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. There were people in Meadowbrook who didn't want her here, and she couldn't pretend that everything would go back to normal overnight. "I've been thinking," Alicia said slowly, her voice heavy with emotion. "Maybe it would be best if I left town for a while, just until things calm down." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "Leave but Alicia. This is your home." "I know," Alicia said, her voice trembling, "but I don't feel safe anymore. I don't know if I ever will." In the days that followed, Alicia wrestled with the decision of whether or not to leave Meadowbrook. The support from the Bennetts and the community had been overwhelming, but the fear remained. Every time she stepped outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She knew she couldn't live like this forever, but she also didn't want to give in to fear. She had spent years building a life here, making friends, caring for the Bennett children, becoming a part of the community. Leaving felt like running away, like letting the people who hated her win. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Alicia sat down with Sarah and Mark to talk about her decision. "I've thought a lot about what you both said," Alicia began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I've decided to stay." Sarah's face lit up with relief. "Oh, Alicia, I'm so glad." Alicia smiled softly. "I love this town. I love your family. And I won't let the fear control me anymore." Mark nodded, his expression filled with admiration. "Well, stand by you, Alicia. Whatever happens, we're here for you." As Alicia made the decision to stay in Meadowbrook, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident in the park had shaken her to her core, but it had also opened her eyes to the power of her voice. She had never seen herself as an activist, but now she realized that she had a responsibility, not just to herself, but to the community. She began attending local meetings and joining conversations about how to address the racial tensions that had been exposed by the incident. She worked with other community leaders to organize workshops on diversity and inclusion, speaking out about her experience and encouraging others to confront their own biases. Through it all, Alicia found strength in the people who had supported her, the Bennetts, the neighbors who had rallied around her, and even some of the people who had once looked at her with suspicion. Slowly but surely, Meadowbrook began to change. Months had passed since the incident at Meadowbrook Park, and the town had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. What had once been a place of quiet, unspoken tensions had evolved into a community that actively engaged with its issues, rather than brushing them aside. Meadowbrook was no longer divided by racial lines or assumptions. Instead, it was becoming a beacon of hope for those who believed in reconciliation and growth. The Unity Festival, an event organized by the town's leaders in partnership with local activists, was the clearest sign of this transformation. Held in the town square, the festival was a celebration of the town's diversity, bringing together people from all walks of life to enjoy music, food, and fellowship. Colorful banners waved in the crisp autumn air, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the streets. It was a day meant to heal the wounds of the past and celebrate the progress that had been made. Jason stood near the entrance to the square, taking it all in. His heart felt heavy with emotion as he watched children of all races playing together on the newly renovated playground, their laughter carrying across the open space. The sight filled him with both hope and regret. It was a stark reminder of how far the town had come and how far he had fallen. He had been removed from his position as sheriff, a consequence he had come to accept, though it still stung. But today wasn't about him. It was about the town, about Alicia, and about the future. Since losing his badge, Jason had found a new purpose. He had dedicated himself to working on community projects, including leading workshops for law enforcement on racial bias and cultural sensitivity. It wasn't easy at first. Many of his former colleagues were reluctant to engage in such conversations, and the pain of losing the career he had built was still fresh. But Jason knew this was the only way forward. He had partnered with local leaders, including Alicia, to organize programs that encouraged dialogue between the police and the people they served. His life had taken a sharp turn from what he had envisioned, but he was finally beginning to understand the power of real accountability and the importance of personal growth. As he stood there, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Alicia standing beside him, a soft smile on her face. "I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice warm but cautious. Jason smiled back, grateful for her presence. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied. "This festival, it's incredible. Look at what we've all built together." Alicia nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's a good start. There's still work to be done, but today is about celebrating the progress we've made." Jason's heart swelled with emotion. "I'm grateful for your help," he said, his voice thick. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Alicia met his gaze, her expression softening. "It's not about me, Jason. It's about all of us. But I'm glad you found a way to make things right." Just then, Sarah Bennett approached with the children in tow, both of them running ahead to greet Alicia. They hugged her tightly, their faces beaming with excitement. Miss Alicia Eli shouted, his voice filled with joy. "Can we go get some cotton candy?" Alicia laughed, ruffling his hair. "Sure, go on ahead. I'll catch up with you in a minute." As the children ran off toward the food stands, Sarah smiled at Jason and Alicia. "It's amazing, isn't it, seeing everyone come together like this?" Jason nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "It is," he agreed. "It's more than I ever thought was possible." Sarah's eyes met Jason's, her expression serious but kind. "You've come a long way, Jason. I know it hasn't been easy, but I want you to know that we see the work you've been doing. The town sees it." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much time trying to make amends, but hearing those words from Sarah, a woman whose family he had wronged, felt like the first real step toward healing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." Sarah smiled, her eyes warm. "We all make mistakes, Jason. What matters is how we choose to grow from them." As Sarah walked away to join her family, Jason stood in the fading light of the afternoon, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. He wasn't fully redeemed, not yet, but he was on the right path. As the sun began to set, the festival reached its climax. The mayor, Garrett Wilson, took to the stage, addressing the crowd that had gathered in the town square. "Today is a special day for Meadowbrook," Mayor Wilson began, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "It's a day to celebrate who we are as a community and the progress we've made together. But more importantly, it's a day to acknowledge that the journey toward justice and equality is ongoing. We've come a long way, but there is still more work to be done." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jason felt a swell of pride as he stood beside Alicia, watching the town embrace the moment. The mayor continued, highlighting the initiatives that had been put in place to address racial bias in policing and to create a more inclusive community. Finally, Mayor Wilson turned his attention to Jason, inviting him to the stage. Jason hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the first time he had been in such a public spotlight since the incident, and the weight of the town's eyes on him was overwhelming. But he knew this was part of his journey, part of making things right. He stepped up to the podium, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I stand before you today not as the sheriff I once was, but as someone who is trying to be better. I've made mistakes that hurt people I care about. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to keep doing the work, to keep learning, and to keep growing." The crowd was silent, listening intently. "I'm proud of the changes we've made as a community," Jason continued, his voice steady. "And I'm committed to continuing this work, not just for myself, but for all of us." Meadowbrook is a special place, and I believe that together we can build a future where everyone feels safe, valued, and seen. He stepped back from the podium, his heart racing, and was met with applause. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was genuine. And for Jason, that was enough. In the days following the festival, Alicia found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The Unity Festival had been a success, and the town was slowly healing, but Alicia knew that her journey wasn't over. She had decided to stay in Meadowbrook, but she also knew that there was still work to be done, not just for the community, but for herself. One morning, as she walked through the park where everything had started, she felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The playground was filled with children, their laughter echoing through the air, and Alicia couldn't help but smile. She had come a long way since that day, and while the scars were still there, they were healing. As she sat down on a bench, she was joined by Rachel Collins, one of the local activists who had worked closely with her in organizing the festival. "Hey," Rachel said, sitting beside her. "How are you feeling?" Alicia smiled softly. "Better. Lighter, I guess. It feels like we've turned a corner, but I know there's still a lot of work ahead." Rachel nodded. "Yeah, but we've made real progress. People are talking, and that's the first step. You've been a huge part of that, Alicia. You've inspired so many people to stand up and speak out." Alicia's heart swelled with pride. She had never seen herself as a leader, but now she realized that her voice had power, and she was ready to use it. Meanwhile, Jason was finding his own way forward. Though he was no longer sheriff, he had embraced his role in the community in a new capacity. He worked closely with law enforcement to implement changes in how officers were trained, focusing on de-escalation tactics and addressing implicit bias. His fall from grace had been hard, but it had also been the catalyst for a transformation he never would have expected. One afternoon, Jason was sitting in a diner, sipping coffee and reviewing notes for an upcoming training session. He had been meeting with local leaders and community members, trying to gather feedback on what was working and what still needed improvement. As he flipped through his notes, the bell over the door jingled, and Officer Kyle Sanders walked in. Kyle had been Jason's partner for years, and their relationship had become strained after the incident. "Mind if I join you?" Kyle asked, standing by the booth. Jason nodded, motioning for him to sit. "Of course." Kyle sat down, ordering a cup of coffee before turning to Jason. "I've been hearing good things about the workshops you've been leading," he said, his tone cautious but genuine. Jason smiled. "Thanks. It's been different, but in a good way. We're making progress." Kyle nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I wasn't sure at first, but after sitting through one of the sessions, I get it now. There are things I hadn't considered, ways I hadn't looked at certain situations. I think this is really important work." Jason felt a swell of gratitude. He had been working hard to make amends, and hearing that the message was getting through was more than he could have hoped for. "I appreciate that, Kyle. It means a lot to me." The two men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their past slowly beginning to lift. That evening, Jason returned home to find Emily sitting on the porch, her face soft with a mix of emotions. Since the incident, their relationship had been strained, but Jason had been trying to rebuild the trust he had lost. "Hey, Dad," Emily said as he approached. "I saw the video of your speech at the festival. You did a good job." Jason smiled, sitting beside her. "Thanks, sweetheart. I'm trying." Emily looked down at her hands, her voice soft. "I know, and I can see the changes you're making. I didn't think I'd be able to get past what happened, but I'm proud of you, Dad."
You're really trying to be better?
Jason felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them back, his heart swelling with gratitude. "That means the world to me, Emily. I'm just glad I haven't lost you." Emily leaned over, resting her head on his shoulder. "You didn't lose me, Dad. I was just hurt. But I see now that you're learning, and that's what matters." They sat together in the fading light of the evening, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Jason knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was truly on the path to healing, not just with his community, but with his family. As autumn gave way to winter, the town of Meadowbrook continued to evolve. The initiatives that had been put in place were gaining momentum, and the conversations about race, justice, and community were ongoing. People were learning, growing, and coming together in ways they never had before. Alicia remained a pillar of strength, continuing her work with local leaders to push for change. She had found her voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The fear that had once gripped her had been replaced by a deep sense of belonging and purpose. Jason, too, had found a new sense of peace. He had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about facing it, owning it, and working every day to be better. He had lost his badge, but in the process, he had gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly serve his community. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the town in a soft white blanket, Meadowbrook stood as a symbol of what was possible when people came together to confront their biases and build a future rooted in justice, understanding, and hope. Several months later, Meadowbrook continued to thrive. The town's efforts to address racial tensions had become a model for other communities, with leaders from nearby towns visiting to learn from Meadowbrook's success. Jason had found a new calling in life, dedicating himself fully to the work of reforming police practices. He traveled to different communities, sharing his story and helping other officers confront their own biases. Though he would always carry the weight of his past mistakes, he had found peace in knowing that he was making a difference. Alicia, too, had found her place in Meadowbrook. She had become a respected leader, not just within the town, but beyond. Her voice had inspired others to speak up, and her strength had shown the community what true resilience looked like. As the town came together for another Unity Festival the following year, Jason and Alicia stood side by side, watching the children play and the community celebrate. They had come so far together, and though the journey wasn't over, the future felt brighter than it ever had before. As the story of Jason, Alicia, and Meadowbrook comes to an end, we're reminded of the power of understanding, redemption, and the strength found in unity. Their journey shows us that no matter the mistakes made, there's always a path forward through accountability, growth, and empathy. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that touch on important themes of community, justice, and healing. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one. Hit the subscribe button and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter in the journey toward a better world. The meeting hall was packed. People filled every seat, while others stood along the walls. The agenda was to discuss further reforms that would continue the progress they had made, but tensions were high. Some feared too much change too quickly, while others believed that if they didn't keep pushing, the town could fall back into old patterns. Mayor George Dixon called the meeting to order, his voice booming over the crowd. "We've come a long way this year, and tonight we need to talk about where we go from here. We've made some tough decisions, but I think we can all agree that Hollow Creek is on a better path." From the back of the room, Tommy Barnes raised his hand. The room quieted as he stood up to speak. Tommy had come a long way since the night he vandalized everyone's place, but there was still uncertainty in the eyes of many. People weren't sure what he would say. "I know I've been on the wrong side of things before," Tommy began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his past mistakes. "But I've learned that we can't move forward by holding on to hate. I fought against change because I was afraid of losing the town I knew. But I see now that Hollow Creek wasn't perfect, and I want to be part of making it better." There was a murmur of surprise from the crowd, and James, seated near the front, nodded in silent approval. Tommy continued, "I know some of you feel the same way I did, that change is happening too fast. But we can't go back. We shouldn't. We have to keep moving forward together." The room was silent as Tommy sat down, his words sinking in. It was a pivotal moment for the town, as someone who had once been a staunch opponent of progress now stood firmly in support of it. After a few moments, Rachel Morales, who had returned to Hollow Creek to visit and see how the town was progressing, stood up. "Tommy's right. Change is hard, but look around, look at what you've already accomplished. You've come together as a community in ways that wouldn't have been possible a year ago, and you've become an example for towns just like this one all over the state." As Rachel spoke, Heads nodded throughout the room. The crowd seemed united in a way they hadn't been before. The meeting continued with discussions about new initiatives, funding for community programs, youth mentorship, and plans to integrate diversity into every facet of public life.
By the time the meeting adjourned, it was clear that Hollow Creek had turned a corner.
The town had decided they were moving forward. Later that evening, after the town meeting had ended, James took a quiet walk through the now peaceful streets of Hollow Creek. As he passed the park, he spotted Mildred Sanders sitting on a bench, her cane resting by her side. "Mind if I join you?" James asked, approaching her with a smile. "Of course, James," Mildred said, her face lighting up. "Sit, sit. I was just thinking about how much has changed since that day at the diner." James sat down beside her, gazing out at the park. Children were playing on the swings, their laughter filling the air, a symbol of the town's new sense of peace. "I was thinking about it too," James said, his voice quiet but reflective. "It feels like so much has happened. But at the same time, it's hard to believe how far we've come." Mildred nodded, her eyes misting over with emotion. "I never thought I'd live to see the day when this town could change like this. For so long it felt like we were stuck. But you showed us something different. You showed us that we could be better." James felt a lump form in his throat. "I didn't do it alone, Mildred. It's been all of us. People like you, Rachel, Emily, Tommy even." Mildred chuckled softly. "Maybe, but we all needed someone to remind us what we were capable of." "That's what you did, James." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the sunset over the park. It was a quiet, reflective moment, one that reminded James of why he had stayed, why he had chosen to fight for this town. "It's not over," James said, more to himself than to Mildred. "There's still work to be done." "There's always more to be done," Mildred replied with a knowing smile. "But you've given this town something it didn't have before: hope." Meanwhile, Emily Green had been working on her biggest story yet. The pieces she had written for the local paper had caught the attention of a national magazine, and they had commissioned her to write a long-form feature about the transformation of Hollow Creek. She had spent months interviewing people: James, Tommy, Rachel, Sheriff Nate Johnson, and countless others. She poured her heart into the article, determined to capture the essence of what had happened in this small town. It wasn't just a story about racism or a fight for equality. It was about community, about resilience, about the power of one person's actions to ignite change. When the feature was published, it was an instant success. Readers from across the country were moved by the story of Hollow Creek, and Emily was flooded with messages of support. People wanted to know more. How had the town done it? How could they replicate that success in their own communities? For Emily, it was a deeply personal victory. She had grown up in Hollow Creek, and for a long time, she hadn't believed that the town could change. But now, as she read the responses to her article, she knew that anything was possible. The next spring, the first integrated class graduated from Hollow Creek High School. It was a historic moment, not just for the students, but for the entire town. The graduation ceremony was held in the town square, and the entire community showed up to celebrate. James was there, sitting in the front row with Mildred, Tommy, and Rachel, all of them beaming with pride. Lily Sanders, Mildred's granddaughter, gave the valedictory speech, speaking eloquently about the future, about unity, and about the lessons they had learned from the town's struggles. "We are the generation that will carry this town forward," Lily said, her voice clear and strong, "and we will do it together. Because we've learned that we are stronger when we stand as one." The crowd erupted into applause, and as the graduates tossed their caps into the air, there was a sense of triumph, of new beginnings. Hollow Creek had come so far, and now a new generation was ready to take the reins. As the town continued to grow and change, Harold Brooks made a surprising announcement. He was bringing back the name Rose's Diner. But this time, the name would reflect something different. Harold stood outside the diner, addressing a small crowd of onlookers. James, Mildred, and the rest of the diner's regulars were there, curious about the announcement. "Rose's Diner was named after my mother," Harold began, his voice filled with emotion. "She was a kind woman, a woman who believed in treating everyone with respect. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We let this place become a symbol of division. Harold paused, glancing at James, who gave him an encouraging nod. But now I want to reclaim that name, Harold continued. This diner is going to stand for something new, something my mother would be proud of. It's going to be a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone has a seat at the table. The crowd cheered, and as the new sign for Rose's Diner was unveiled, it felt like a fitting tribute to the town's journey. As summer approached, Rachel Morales prepared to leave Hollow Creek once again, this time for good. Her work had taken her to other towns and cities, and while she had grown deeply attached to Hollow Creek, she knew it was time to move on. On her last night in town, she gathered with James, Emily, and the others at Rose's Diner for one final meal. The atmosphere was warm and nostalgic, filled with laughter and shared memories. "I'm going to miss this place," Rachel admitted as she sipped her coffee. "But I know you all are going to keep the momentum going." "Well, miss you too, Rachel," James said, smiling warmly. "But don't worry, we've got this." They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the town's journey, about how far they had come, and about the road that still lay ahead. When it was time to say goodbye, there were hugs, tears, and promises to keep in touch. But as Rachel drove away from Hollow Creek the next morning, she left knowing that the town was in good hands. Several months after Rachel's departure, James received a letter from her. He sat on his porch, the autumn air crisp and cool, as he read her words. "Dear James, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about Hollow Creek a lot lately, and I wanted to check in. I've been working with a community out west, and it reminds me so much of where Hollow Creek was when I first arrived. But seeing the progress we made gives me hope that change is possible, no matter where you are. I just wanted to thank you once again for everything you've done for the town and for me. You've taught me so much about patience, about perseverance, and about how change really happens. You'll never forget our time together. Take care of yourself, James, and take care of Hollow Creek. With gratitude, Rachel." James smiled as he folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Rachel's words were a reminder that their work was far from over, but it was also a reminder of how much they had already accomplished. Over time, Tommy Barnes fully embraced his role as a leader in the town's new direction. He became a regular volunteer at the community center, working with young people who, like him, had once been resistant to change. One afternoon, as Tommy sat on a bench outside the center, talking with a group of teenagers, he realized just how far he had come. The anger and fear that had once controlled him were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. "I used to think change was something to be afraid of," Tommy told the teens. "But now I see it's what makes us better. We can't grow if we don't open ourselves up to new ways of thinking." The teens listened intently, nodding in agreement. Tommy's journey had become an inspiration to many, showing that it was never too late to change. 1 year after the March for Unity, the town of Hollow Creek came together once again to celebrate. The town square was filled with music, food, and laughter, as people from all walks of life gathered to reflect on the progress they had made. James stood with Sheriff Nate Johnson, Emily Green, and Lily Sanders, watching the festivities with a deep sense of pride. The town was thriving, its people united by a shared vision of a better future. As the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow over the square, James felt a quiet sense of contentment. Hollow Creek had been through so much, but they had come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever. In the years that followed, Hollow Creek continued to evolve. The town's story became a beacon of hope for other communities struggling with their own divisions. People came from far and wide to visit Rose's Diner, to see the mural painted by the teenagers, and to meet the people who had made change possible. But for James, it wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about being a hero or a leader. It was about the quiet, steady work of building a community where everyone had a place. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above the town, James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, that there would always be more work to do. But for now, in this moment, he was content. Hollow Creek was his home, and it was a home worth fighting for. As the story of James and Hollow Creek shows, change takes courage, community, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. If you've been inspired by their journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of unity, justice, and hope. And remember, your voice matters. Let us know in the comments how this story touched you and what kind of stories you'd love to hear next. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free. Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbor's son, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith. Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better, now richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next. As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.